Hi, I'm Hal Habecker for Finishing Well Ministries. You know, I'm a boomer. Grew up in the 60s during the Vietnam era. The Vietnam War tore our country apart. And besides the 50,000 who died in combat, it left a generation of soldiers with emotional scars, resulting in suicides, broken families, and a trail of tragedies. But we read in Genesis and the story of Joseph that God can transform something meant for harm into something good to accomplish His purposes. In the case of Ron and Pam Weinzapfel, He did just that. And in doing so, He not only saved their marriage, He enabled them to finish well by helping others.
I really was a spoiled brat. High school was a fun place. I didn't go to school to learn. I went to have a good time. I played as much as I could. I was not planning to go on to college. One day my mother said, I just sent you something in the mail, and it was a brown envelope from the United States government. It said, we want you. And my first thought was, I don't want them. They took us in, put us on a bus, and we were drafted. We finished our basic training, we got our orders. I was in a plane, and we were taking off, and we were heading to Vietnam. They put us on a Chinook, landed on top of the mountain. We go out on patrol the very next day. I see my first dead body. We go through a lot of jungle. I was scared to death. 363 days. The first person I killed, I was sick to my stomach. I threw up. I could not believe that I had done something like that. Totally against my whole being. I lost a lot of people over there. Leroy Nolly was a Bible-thumping, preaching, wonderful guy. He shared the word with us. We got hit one night, and when we went out the next morning to check everything, we still to this day do not know what killed him. I was wounded twice, dusted off twice. I was in the field solidly for 9 months, and then I got home. And no, I was not the same person when I came home. I had a lot of hate. I did not like Vietnamese. I did not like anything. I just came back very angry. Death changes you. I'd never read the Bible. I'd never opened up a Bible. I started looking though, and I met a person, Leroy Imes, who was a Marine. And one night he said, you can either go to hell or you can go to heaven. Now, which one do you want to choose? Sat down and I prayed and I asked God into my life. And I knew that I was a wretched person. And that was the only thing that was going to save my life. And I can tell you truthfully, if I hadn't, I would not be alive today. I came home and my aunt lived in Colorado, and my aunt was a nurse. She brought us a list home of trainees that were becoming nurses. Pam wasn't on the list. But she owed a favor to one of the nurses that I had asked, and she had to take her place. We dated for 6 months, we were engaged for 6 months, and then we became married. I was a workaholic. I worked as much as I could, and my kids suffered for it. By 1981, I was the top car salesman in Dallas.
He literally did not talk about being in the military or war at all. And he still didn't really tell me any details of his time in Vietnam, about any of the situations he'd been in, any loss of life, anything. On our 10th anniversary, I was ready to leave my husband. I wanted out because I felt so alone in that marriage and didn't realize what his deal was. I could not put that together with war. And I opened my Bible and it was to Jeremiah 32. And as you're reading through that, he says, is anything too difficult for me? And, well, God and I loved each other, so no, I knew there was nothing too difficult for him. Although I can tell you, I pretty much thought my husband was. Had put that to the max. But as you get towards the end of that chapter, it says, if they would be obedient and they would listen to his voice, that he would give them one heart and one way, for the good of themselves and their children after them. That was his promise to me.
Dave Metzke, found out I was military. And he said, you know, you'd make a great missionary.
We were supporting a missionary here in Fort Hood, and we came down and gave them relief for a month.
I started my whole attitude changing.
After 9/11, he kept saying that he didn't want other soldiers to go to war without knowing the Lord.
Because this is when they were talking about how many suicides there were and how many things were happening in the Army. And I knew I could have been one of those guys, because if I had not accepted the Lord, I wouldn't be here now.
It was that month of working here as I began to get to know soldiers who had been in combat and interacting with them that I really began to realize that there was a lot of stuff that evidently my husband had probably dealt with that he'd never talked about.
I decided, do I want to go looking for another job, or do I want to finally do what God wants me to do?
What are we doing with the rest of our lives? What are we doing that matters for eternity?
We came to Fort Hood and we started working around to see what there was for us to do. I work at the WTU, which is a Warrior Transitional Unit, taking soldiers that are hurt and trying to bring them back to their health, or if they can't come back to where they were, they release them from the Army and they become civilian again. Pamela does the Protestant women of the chapel.
Last year I led a study on PTSD and wives. I guess I was surprised because sometimes the wives aren't willing to admit that there are problems at home or that they're struggling. That gave me a really good opportunity to channel some of those gals into our Tuesday night PTSD group.
We have a nice sized group. You see the one that never talks. He holds it inside. He thinks that he's strong enough that he doesn't need to talk about it. He's invincible, and he's not.
You know, what most people aren't aware of is when a husband has PTSD, his wife ends up with secondary PTSD. She's been as robbed of her husband as he has of his life. The amazing thing was Ron and I had lived that grief and trauma for 20 years of our marriage and didn't even realize it. When we opened that manual, When War Comes Home, I was stunned to realize that all of the things God had taken me through for 20 years, the struggling with Ron's isolation, his shallow relationship, even with me, and I was the closest person to him. He would say I was his best friend. I was stunned to realize God had taken me through all of that over 20 years. I am so grateful that I didn't give up on our marriage in those early years. I had no idea where God was taking us and what He was doing and where that was going to lead. But I loved Him enough to be obedient and to hang in there when things were tough and to walk that road, only to find out that these are the best years of our life.
Like Ron, God can turn something bad in your life into something good. Look back at your life. Think about it. Pray about it. Ask God to show you how He can use you and your life experiences, flaws and all, to finish well. I'm Hal Habecker.